지난번에 우리가 김용 총재님을 모시고 한 나라가 가난해지거나 부자가 되는 이유에 대한 영상을 만들었는데요. 반응이 좋아서 김용 총재님과 또 다른 이야기를 나눠봤습니다. 김용 총재님은 전 세계은행 총재님일 뿐 아니라 이전에 아이비리그 대학 중에 하나인 다트모스트 대학의 총장님을 지내기도 했고요. 지금도 또 다른 아이비리그 대학인 브라운 대학의 이사회 멤버시기도 합니다. 그래서 오늘은 김용 총재님과 함께 한국과 미국의 입시 제도와 교육의 차이에 대한 얘기를 나눠볼까 합니다. 한국인들이 청소년의 교육에 투자하는 시간과 돈과 에너지는 전 세계적으로 압도적일 거예요. 자기의 청춘을 다 희생해서 대학 입시를 위해서 공부만 한다라고 해도 과언이 아닐 겁니다. 사실 사회가 청소년들의 공부에 투자하는 목적은 이들이 좋은 대학을 가는 것뿐 아니라 그 좋은 대학을 나와서 세계의 심각한 기아, 질병, 환경 문제들을 해결하고 유수한 기업들을 세우고 세계를 바꾸는 특허들을 출연한다는 결과가 나와야만 그들의 교육에 투자한 만큼 아웃풋이 나오고 있다라고 얘기를 할 수 있을 겁니다. 그런데 한국 청소년들이 교육에 쓴 시간과 돈에 비해서 그 정도 아웃풋이 실제로 나오고 있냐에 대해서는 의문을 가지고 있는 분들이 많죠. 예를 들어서 우리나라에서는 언제 우리나라에서 노벨 물리학상이 나올까? 라고 하면서 매번 토론이 벌어지죠. 하버드에 관련된 사람 중에 노벨상을 수상한 사람은 150명이 넘는다고 해요. 또 다른 아이비리그 대학인 컬럼비아 대학 역사상 노벨상을 수상한 사람은 80명이 넘는다라고 웹사이트에 기재되어 있어요. 실제로 미국에 큰 기근이 돌았을 때 풍토병에 강한 새로운 종자를 만들어서 극복하거나 1차 대전이나 2차 대전처럼 큰 전쟁을 겪고 있을 때 미국의 압도적인 승리를 이끌어낸 신무기를 개발한 것도 아이비리그 대학을 졸업한 인재들이었어요. 그래서 많은 미국의 평론가들은 미국이 세계를 지배하는 데 있어서 가장 강력한 무기는 항공모함도 핵무기도 아닌 아이비리그 대학 시스템이다라는 말을 많이 합니다. 미국 대학은 어떤 기준으로 인재를 뽑고 미국 학생들은 어떻게 이런 대학에 조인하기 위해서 스스로를 준비하며 또 미국 대학의 어떤 점들이 이렇게 세계적인 인재들을 배출할 수 있는 우수한 시스템을 만들어냈는지 가장 잘 말씀해 주실 수 있는 분이 김용 총재님이라고 생각해서 오늘 컨텐츠 준비해 봤습니다.
The world looks up the American university system. Often read comments like the biggest weapon that U.S. has. The
I
biggest
agree.
weapon
I
of
agree.
the world domination that U.S. has is its universities.
I agree.
So, what do you think sets American university system apart from university system of all the other countries in the world that makes it such a powerful tool for prosperity in America?
If you look at sort of my task every year at Dartmouth, if you take the entire cost of undergraduate education and divide it by the number of students, undergraduates, the total cost for me to run the entire school for the undergraduates back in those days, 2009 to 2012, was about $160,000 per year. Right? From tuition, we got about $15,000 a year. So we generated about 10% of the cost of educating a person from the person paying me. So how did I make up for the rest of the $150,000 that I couldn't cover? It was from donations. Right? Dartmouth now has an $8 billion endowment. I spent a lot of time on the road raising money from people. Every year, there's a thing called the annual gift, where every year you give a certain amount of money to the university to give other people a chance. That's a tradition that's incredibly powerful in the United States. I mean, and we do things for them. We'll, everything from there are benches, on the green that have people's names on them, right? This is a Sungyun bench, right? We do all kinds of things like that. But there's also a real calculation there. I think people know that, look, if I'm 30 or 40 or 50 or even 60 or 70, the fact that I went, for me, Brown and then Harvard, stays with me forever, right? And so the strength of my resume, in many ways, is determined by how well my alma mater is doing. So continuing to give to my alma mater gives me a lot of benefits. It makes me, they put my name on things. Maybe if my child wants to go to school there, there's no guarantee of admission, but they take a second look. I think that this tradition of giving back to your school to make sure that its status, its reputation is maintained so that your reputation is maintained. That's just a part of U.S. culture, and I don't think it's a part of very many other cultures.
Right. So I remember reading an article in a French newspaper. They said that endowment of 2 or 3 Ivy League schools together was larger than the entire Board of Education budget for all the universities in France. And they were saying this is how America produced so many Nobel Prizes or so many field medals, and how can we replicate that system? But in fact, it's difficult to replicate that system because these are individual donors who are giving money voluntarily.
Right. Yeah. Also, if you give that kind of award, you get a tax deduction. Right? So I think it's a great system. For example, we got a lot of donations to give opportunities to students from all over the world who normally wouldn't have that opportunity. And the fact that the other developed countries in the world don't have that, that's why America's competitiveness is still great. It's why some of the more conservative elements are really attacking the Ivy League institutions and others like it. It's crazy. The great university teaching hospitals, right? They're the crown jewels of the United States, without question.
Have you seen the Netflix documentary College Admission Scandal?
No, but of course I followed that very closely.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of a culture shock, I think, for a lot of Korean people, because Korean people believe that it was a very Korean thing for a parent to sacrifice that much or even engage in criminal activity to get their children into the best schools. And then we see that Americans were doing the same thing. The sensation that I get from reading books that American professors are writing about American education system now is that it looks almost like American education system is becoming more and more like Korean education system. Recently, I read that before, in American kindergarten, most children were given things to play with, whereas now, because of the pressure from parents to prep them for standardized tests later, they give them literacy, arithmetic exercises. Do you get the sense that American education is moving closer and closer to some of the worst parts of East Asian education?
There's still not the same kind of focus on after-school education. My kids went to both public and private schools. And for my kids and for the vast majority of kids who are going to very selective private schools, you go to school from 8 in the morning until 3, and then you do sports in the afternoon from 3 to 5 or 6. And the Ivy League is a sports league. The very first meeting I went to of Ivy League presidents, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be great. We're going to talk about all the great issues in education. We're going to talk about, the nature of higher education in the world. It's going to be great just to sit and talk with them. That's not what we talked about at all. We beat each other up because we were arguing about what kind of students we can recruit for football, right? And you think, why was that? Well, because it's a sports league. And so you can't think about the Ivy League as these kinds of institutions that are so focused on academic quality with each other. There are some cram schools, but like, for example, they're in New York City for Korean kids who came over. Not everybody does that.
That's another question, actually,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask. A lot of Korean parents, my parents included, send their kids to the US to get them away from this crazy 학원 입시 culture. But in fact, what they end up doing is in Koreatown, they end up recreating
The 학원
the 학원 system, the 사교육, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask was that, do you think it's more the institutions or more the parents?
Just to give you some insight, we take very seriously in the United States. I was president of Dartmouth, but I'm now on the board at Brown University. It was my alma mater. The schools take very seriously this notion of bringing in a diverse class. Right? So if you're an Asian American of 17 applying to school, if you go in there saying, I didn't do any sports, I didn't do any leadership activities, and I want to study computer science, you're going to have a hard time, right? Because there's just too many people like you. Right? And so a lot of them now, the young people are wising up, and a lot of the Korean American boys and Asian Americans are coming in saying, I want to study French literature and history or something like that, right? And then they go and they study computer science once they get there. But they know the game. The great thing in the United States, there's so many good schools, right? My sister taught at Colby College in Maine, a small liberal arts institution that's just outstanding. And you go to Wall Street, you go to the great hospitals, you go to anywhere where there are very, very high achieving people, and they've come from a lot of different kinds of schools. So the opportunities are much, much broader. And also, everybody knows that we're looking for different things. Right? If you didn't have the highest board scores, but from the age of 12, you've been traveling to Haiti and you have a real commitment to, serving the poorest people in the world. No matter what skin color you are, they're going to be very interested in you. So being interesting, having a unique perspective, these things are still really important. I wouldn't say it's moving in that direction. I think there are certain groups of people who are trying to move it in that direction, right? But you can't fake things like creativity. You can't fake things like having a commitment to poor people. If you want to be a pre-med now in the United States, if you want to go into medical school and you say, I want to study, biology and become a medical doctor, most of the kids who are applying to medical school, in order to get into the best medical schools in the United States, probably 70 to 80% have had some experience living in a really poor country serving those people. Could you imagine something like that in Korea? That's a long ways away. Yeah.
I'm sure you know that there's a huge Korean American community in Irvine, California. And in Korea, it's seen as a community of Korean people who's just moved to the US to get their kids into Ivy League schools. And I've been talking to a friend of mine who has a high school age son there. He says because they understand that Ivy League is recruiting for diversity. If you go to like school orchestra, it's like all Koreans. And then they see that a lot of Koreans are doing violin. And they're like, oh, yeah, Ivy Leaguers are going to get too many Korean applicants who have violin. So next year, all the Korean kids show up with harps because their parents just studied that, oh, no, there's no Koreans doing harps. So this is going to be a unique thing on their resume. Now all the parents think the same thing. So the next year, like all the Korean kids are trying out for harps.
It used to be fencing, right? Fencing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It used to be fencing.
But I think I have an inkling that I got into NYU because I was probably like only Korean applicant they had who had a national Latin exam score because I was really into like ancient Greece and Rome. You tell me about selection criteria that might be, I don't know.
Well, I think you were a good student, but that helped, right? I'm absolutely sure that it helped, right?
Actually, a lot of Korean people who are listening is probably thinking that American universities select people on a very strange basis because Korean people think that top university means a collection of people with the highest test scores.
Generally speaking, if somebody has been faking it, you can tell, especially on the interview, right? When you're interviewing somebody, you say things like, so you play the harp and you're a fencer. Where did that come from? But on the other hand, on the other hand, if they're wonderfully talented at playing the harp and they're nationally ranked as a fencer, then you have a good chance to get in. Right? There's no question. You have a good chance to get in. I think that's hilarious. Everyone's playing harp. It's like, how can you find new ways of torturing your kids? Right? I'm not only going to make you play an instrument, but your instrument you have to carry around with a truck, right? So
it's one of the most musically challenging instruments in the world.
But I'm not a musician myself, so I wouldn't know that. But I've seen the cases in which the harps come. Right? So it's like you have to have your own SUV just to carry around your musical instrument. Yeah. So for Koreans, the thing is, don't try to pretend to be diverse. Be actually diverse.
Right.
Actually do things that really make you unique. So, for example, if you're a Korean American kid and you've been doing volunteer work in Haiti or volunteer work in Madagascar for your entire adolescence, from 13 to 18, you've learned some powerful lessons. You've become part of a community that no one could have imagined. If you actually do that, you're going to get in. That's a powerful message. Right?
Last year, again, we became the country among the OECD countries with the highest elderly poverty percentage. So about 40% of Korean elderly are living in poverty. So a lot of newspaper articles wrote about what the reasons were. And one newspaper said that Korean parents on average spend about $300,000 per child to prep him for the college entrance exam. So if you have two kids, it's like $700,000 you didn't save for your retirement. And if a middle-class person spends $700,000 without saving, then it's fairly obvious what the results are going to be. And a lot of Korean people feel that that's needed in order to have their children succeed in the world. So as an ex-university president, what do you think about this mad competition to get into top colleges at whatever the cost?
Let me tell you a story. So I think it was 2017. I was having a discussion with Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the International Monetary Fund at the time. And I said, Christine, in Korea, kids starting around middle school go to school from 7 to 11. And she said, wow, that's really amazing. I know that Koreans always do so well on sort of the global competition for standardized exams. How is it that they're doing so well going to school only 4 hours a day? And she didn't know. I said, no, Christine, it's 7 in the morning until 11 at night. She said, what? Right? What? And so then she came to Korea in, I think it was later, 2019. I'd left the World Bank already by that time. And she looked at all the data, the suicide data, looking at the educational system that, I think people have said that this educational system grinds down the youth of Korea. And she said, if you're not careful, Korea will become a collective suicide society. Right? And, Christine is a very thoughtful, very careful speaker. So she wouldn't say that if she wasn't really, really concerned. Right? So I'm very concerned about the educational system.
The Hagwon frenzy feeds into the demographic crisis as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons, like I was saying, that a lot of middle class men hesitate about getting married or having children is they remember how much their parents spent on them. And then they say, okay, if I become a father, then I'm going to have to pay out $300,000 per child for their private education.
Absolutely.
And I am not confident that I want to live that lifestyle. And then they see their parents who are living in poverty because they spend so much on my education. Like you're saying, I'm not making living wage. I'm barely, making ends meet. And then I have to support my parents, and then I have to pay out $300,000 per child for their education. I don't want to do that.
Right.
And that's why they give up having a family. So this education problem is I believe is at the core of every other problem that we were talking about up to this point.
Are there good things? I think the Korean educational system teaches some really important things. Persistence. It teaches discipline.
We learned that. Yes.
It teaches organization. And this is what, in many ways, if you look at boy bands, girl bands, whatever, the musicians, it's almost as if a lot of them are the failures of the Korean educational system, but still they have such a strong work ethic that they become the greatest bands in the world. So that's a really great thing. Educational theorists, educational psychologists will tell you that it's very hard to increase your IQ, the measured IQ. But the thing that you can really build, like a muscle, is your determination and persistence, right? So all this stuff is very important. But I think that we've reached a point now, you have to say it's doing more harm than good. Right? The Hagwon system, I think, is punishing. There are a lot of the suicides, a lot of the depression that you're seeing comes from that system. And what also happens is you can spend $300,000 for your children, and you can get them into actually a fairly reasonable school, maybe not 서울대학교, but, 서울에 있는 대학교.
Right. Which is what most people are shooting for anyways.
Which what most people are shooting for anyways, but that doesn't guarantee a living wage, really, right? I don't have any specific answers for it, but I think one should look around. So, there's no simple path. We were always looking around saying, well, what do the Sanjin-nara, what do they do? We're going to just copy them. It's not a matter of copying them, but it's a matter of looking all over the world and saying, what are the best practices? What are the most humane practices? What are the countries that have adopted an approach to education that's getting results almost as good as Korea, but without the incredibly increased expenditure and the toll on the mental health of the young people? I think systems like that are out there. I think we have to have that conversation. Finland, was a great example for a much different kind of system that had arguably just as good outcomes, but very different. Very little homework. Your school ended at 3:30, 4 o'clock every day. And the thing that they focused on was that they really, really elevated the status of teachers. So every teacher had to be in the top 20% of their graduating high school class to get into the teacher training program. But I mean, Finland's different. Finland is one of the Nordic societies that is essentially socialist in the way that it deals with income. And so, they argued that because we so focus on teacher training, every teacher has a master's degree. Every teacher has spent 2 years, working as a student teacher. Every teacher has to be continuously upgraded in terms of their skills, their knowledge. And they say by doing that, we've been able to reduce the number of hours, and our outcomes on the basis of testing seem a lot better.
If you could wave a magic wand and fix the Korean education system? Like one thing about Korean education system. This is the last question. You know, some supernatural power watching this video said, okay, we need to give Dr. Jim a chance to fix Korean education system. I'm gonna give him a magic wand and he can wave it and one problem will be fixed. What would be that problem?
Gosh.
It would get rid of all the political opposition. You can just do it.
I think the Hagwon system, there's benefits to it. It's so unfair because you get what you pay for, right? And the richer students are doing better. If there is a magic wand, I mean, do you have an idea? If you had a magic wand, is there one thing you would fix? I don't know. I think all educational systems are way too complicated to think that fixing one thing is going to work.
I think if I had a magic wand, I would limit study time after school to 2 hours. After school, dedicated study that's just specifically geared toward the college prep, we limit it to 2 hours. And then, you know, whatever books you are reading or paintings you're doing because you like it, that one count toward the 2 hours. But actually, a lot of Korean people that I work with, they said, okay, like I spent, 12 years of my youth doing nothing but doing college prep. The problem is after you get into college, what was that for, right? You learned no useful life skill. You didn't have time to build a social skill or teamwork skill because you were alone in your room. Probably a lot of the materialism that you talk about also comes from that, because when parents motivate their children, they say, okay, like, why do I have to do this? Why can't I go out to play? They say, well, you study hard, you go to Seoul National University, you get a job at, one of the big conglomerates, then you can drive a BMW and have a nice apartment in Gangnam. And that's, if you've been motivated that way for your entire life, obviously, then your head will be full of material things. So I think a lot of problem will be solved if you say, okay, college prep, 1 to 2 hours max. And then rest of the time, dedicate yourself to things you like. That's, I think, what I would do.
So now that you say that, if I had a magic wand, I think I would do something really simple. Like, for example, requiring that all students meditate for 30 to 45 minutes a day.
Oh, wow.
And learn, it's called Chamsan, right? The Buddhist meditation. Chamsan has been shown by study after study after study to have very, very positive effects on the human brain. Right? So at Dartmouth, there was a group that studied Buddhist monks and how their brains functioned, the meditators. And the attendance to the Dalai Lama, you can't study the Dalai Lama, but you can study his attendance. They put them in a functional MRI machine that looks at where the blood is flowing in the brain as you're doing things. And they would put them in this machine and they would flash them very sort of frightening images. And those monks had no startle response.
Oh,
right?
wow.
You've studied many things, so I know you know exactly what that means. No startle response. Right? In other words, their prefrontal cortex, their brain, was able to completely control the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that startles, that is the seat of anxiety. They had complete control of their prefrontal cortex. Wow. A lot of the mental health companies in the United States now are really mostly, breathing and meditation apps. Right? I think if you said only 2 hours, there would be an entire industry figuring out how to get around that, right? But if everybody learned meditation, I think that would be very helpful for mental health. And I would hope, anyway, that it would help to reduce the depression and anxiety that the students might feel. I don't have any brilliant ideas about how to fix things, and I don't think that...
we're just brainstorming.
But we should, and we shouldn't think that there's an easy fix to it, but something like that could have an immediate impact.
I think in Korea, when this goes out, a lot of Hagwons will create a specific course, or they'll work in 35-minute meditation time between their courses and use it as a marketing tool.
But I can tell you that physiologically and even in terms of brain structure, blood flow in the brain, is just no question that it's extremely powerful. The fact that it invested in primary education so early in its development course, and in fact was made fun of by the World Bank, right? That made all the difference to get to where we are now. But to get to the next step, there has to be a complete rethinking of how we build the system from the ground up.
이 인터뷰를 통해서 제가 느낀 것은 대학이라는 것이 무엇이냐라는 것을 대중들이 받아들이는 데 있어서 미국과 한국 사이에 큰 차이가 있는 것 같습니다. 한국의 대학들도 물론 훌륭한 연구를 하는 기관이기도 하지만 대부분의 사람들에게 대학이란 내가 중고등학교 때 얼마나 열심히 입시 공부를 했는지를 인증해줘서 이것이 나의 브랜드가 되는 그런 기관이다라고 생각하는 경우가 많은 것 같아요. 하지만 미국은 이 대학을 브레인 트러스트, 두뇌로 이루어진 미국이라는 나라의 비상기금이다라는 비유법이 있을 정도로 새로운 아이디어가 계속 샘솟아나는 생태계를 미국 여기저기에 만들어 놨다라는 식으로 대학에 대해서 생각하는 경향이 있는 것 같고요. 그게 김용 총재님의 말씀에서 많이 드러났던 것 같아요. 그러면 새로운 아이디어를 계속 만들어낼 수 있는 사회, 생태계 또는 공동체란 어떤 것이냐? 공부만 잘하는 사람이 모여있는 것이 아니라 서로 인생의 궤도가 달랐던 다양한 사람들이 모여서 대화를 할 때 새로운 아이디어가 가장 잘 나온다라고 미국 대학들은 인지를 하고 그 기준에 따라서 사람을 뽑고 있다는 거죠. 그러다 보니까 자연스럽게 명문대학에 입학을 준비하는 학생들도 남과 달라야만 대학에 갈 수 있기 때문에 남들이랑 다 똑같은 것을 공부하는 것이 아니라 다른 경험과 다른 인사이트, 다른 스토리들을 쌓기 위해서 중고등학교 때부터 노력을 하고 그러면서 꼭 아이비리그에 들어간 학생들 뿐 아니라 미국 전체에 남과 다른 경험과 시야를 가진 사람들이 점점 늘어나도록 하는 것이 미국 교육제도의 가장 큰 장점이라는 생각이 들었어요. 우리도 전처럼 일단 공부를 잘하고 성적을 잘 받아서 좋은 대학에 가자라는 생각보다는 대학을 가기 위해서 한 공부가 나중에까지 나 스스로에게 또는 사회에 도움이 되기 위해서는 어떤 방식으로 공부를 해야 되는지 고민할 수 있는 유익한 시간이었던 것 같아요.
I've been watching some of his videos. I'm a big fan. I'm really, really appreciative for having this opportunity. But in speaking directly to the Korean people, I can't tell you how proud I am of being Korean American. Everywhere I go, people are talking to me about the great success story. The only country that went from where I was in 1959, one of the poorest countries in the world, to among the number 11 now in terms of global economies. This is an extraordinary achievement. Along the way, we've left some people behind. Along the way, there have been some side effects that we now have to address. So if you're thinking of hurting yourself, please ask for help. We have to do something about suicide. And also, in the United States, there's a lot of sympathy for families who've had somebody commit suicide. Here, there's still a lot of stigma. Be kind and be compassionate to the families who are left behind. Together, the Korean people can solve this problem. There are a lot of them: depression, anxiety, loneliness, suicide, very low birth rate. But in watching the history of innovation, working together, and looking at, Gummogi Undong, Koreans are capable of selflessness. Koreans are capable of bonding together to do things that no other country literally has ever done. It's time now to tackle this problem. I know we can do it, and anything I can do to help, I'll be honored to do so.